now.
Okay, thank you. By recording the meeting, we're able to post it to our website, and then folks who can't make it to this meeting can listen to it later. If you've looked on our website, the meeting from August has already been posted there, but it's a good way for folks to keep up if they can't make it to the meeting. And so from there, I want to just run through the agenda really quick. We went through the introductions. The purpose of the meeting that we have today, this is an opportunity for us to get input from stakeholders in a timeline that allows us to present that stakeholder input to the Pacific Fishery Management Council as the council goes through their process of considering changes to the Pacific Halibut Catch Sharing Plan. So as I just mentioned, we started off this process with a meeting in August where we went through some preliminary catch from the halibut season and some of the issues that are on the table for council consideration through this process. We provided a recommended range of alternatives that were adopted by the council in September to go through for public review. So it's an opportunity for everyone to look at the alternatives, an opportunity for state managers to do some analysis of the alternatives, and then we come back to the council in November with a recommendation or recommendations on that the council will consider before taking final action at that meeting. So tonight we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about halibut management. The two issues that the council is looking at here are changes to the catch sharing plan. And within that catch sharing plan is a proposal to look at allocations. And then also, which is what we would normally be doing most years, is looking at 2024 season options. And then I did want to spend some time at the end of the meeting to go over some bottomfish information and just orient you all to the process that the council takes up to consider changes to bottomfish rules. Basically, we call them harvest specifications and management measures, but it's quotas and the tools that we use to stay within those quotas. And we're getting that process started for rules that will be in place in 2025 and 2026. So really the only thing that we're going to cover in bottomfish is what does that process look like? What are the opportunities for public input throughout that process? Just to give you some orientation of what's coming up if you're interested in bottomfish. And then we'll finish that and wrap up and try to conclude here at 6:30. And also, I just want to say, if I'm missing a hand up or hand raised, please just let me know. I know Whitney's not going to be on here for the duration of our meeting, but if I'm missing a hand up because I'm not seeing the screen, which is hard to do when I have the presentation up, just let me know. So I'm going to get started here with the halibut agenda item. And just to give you an overview, halibut management includes more than just WDFW and the council. It also, halibut management is overseen in many ways by the IPHC, the International Pacific Halibut Commission. They conduct the science around halibut management and the stock assessment. Especially, they set the annual total catch and the fishery catch, which is, broken down into what we have called in the past the TAC, or the total allowable catch, or the quota. It's really just the quota that we manage to. And then the Pacific Fishery Management Council has what I've been mentioning as the Pacific Halibut Catch Sharing Plan. That catch sharing plan is what takes that total allowable catch and breaks it down into allocations for each sub area within Area 2A. The Pacific Council also facilitates the public process through the meetings. Generally, for halibut, they're in September and November, although we did have this issue came up in June as well. And then National Marine Fisheries Service is responsible for the federal regulations, and those include the season dates. And then the role of WDFW is establishing state regulations that conform to those federal regulations, including also the catch limits. We monitor the quota. We're responsible for enforcement. We also have a role in the public process. So via these WDFW sponsored meetings is where we gather state-specific input and provide that to the council. And then throughout the season and throughout the IPHC's annual meeting and interim meetings, we coordinate with our federal partners at NMFS and other states on in-season actions and other issues that come up. We keep those lines of communication open, also including the tribes as we're managing halibut through these different forums. So just in case you're not familiar, this is a graphic of all of the IPHC's regulatory areas. So down here in the lower right-hand corner is Area 2A, and that includes Washington, Oregon, and California. And Canada here is Area 2B, and then we have Alaska moving to 2C, 3A, all the way into the Bering Sea management. So this is the full range of IPHC management that they're responsible. Washington falls in Area 2A, as I mentioned. It's really the tail end of the range for halibut. And so the bulk of the halibut population is in the Gulf of Alaska and in this area. The catch sharing plan, again, as I mentioned, it really guides the tribal and non-tribal commercial and recreational sport halibut fisheries off the coasts of Washington, Oregon, and California. It prescribes an allocation formula. An allocation formula for the allowable catch. It describes the general season structure of the fisheries, especially the sport sector, and the allocations that are in the catch sharing plan are largely determined from historical use patterns. There are some specific goals for the Washington recreational fishery that are in the catch sharing plan. And the catch sharing plan, if you haven't looked at it, is available on the council's website. There's a link here, but if you need any help with that, I'm happy to let you know. Within those goals that are included in the catch sharing plan for Washington are that we'll establish a season structure for each sub-area that maximizes opportunity and achieves but doesn't exceed the sub-area quotas. And that includes flexibility through in-season actions such as opening additional fishing days or shifting quota between sub-areas, just so that we can achieve our goal of taking the Washington sport allocation. In addition to the goals within the catch sharing plan, through our stakeholder process in Washington, we have additional overarching principles that we really relied on to help guide our discussions on season setting. So for folks that have been around and participated in the halibut fishery for many years, we have the ability of taking a large amount of quota relatively quickly. So one of our season setting principles is that we relied on to try to spread out effort and spread our catch out throughout the season is to avoid effort shift. So where we align our fishing days as much as possible, and we really have done that a lot for the Columbia River and the South Coast at Westport, and the North Coast and CQ. But as you'll see, we've departed from that a little bit, especially on the North Coast and CQ, as we've just tried to achieve our goal of catching all of the quota. So we also are focused on trying to provide as much notice of the season dates as possible to allow anglers to plan rather than add dates in season. And then one of the principles we look at is trying to provide more fishing opportunity in areas where catch was below the sub-area allocation. And then within all of that, we're also trying to recognize traditional fishing days if possible. So for the North Coast, the general approach has to have had that area open on Thursdays and Saturdays. The South Coast is typically open on Sundays and Thursdays, and we look to try to keep the halibut fishery open the best we can in Marine Area 5 to recognize the Memorial Day Halibut Derby in that area. So when we look at the status quo catch sharing plan and the season dates that we have as the starting point, we've got management in these 4 general areas. So Puget Sound being Marine Areas 5 in CQ and also 6 through 10. The catch sharing plan says open as early as April 1 currently. And then in April and May, this area would be open up to 5 days per week and may include at least 1 weekday and 1 weekend day. And then in June, open up to 7 days per week. The status quo season dates for the North Coast are to open in early May and with the flexibility to open on April 30th in years when April 30th falls on a Thursday. In that way, if Marine Area 5 is open on April 30th, we can open the North Coast on April 30th as well. And then on the North Coast in April and May, the current catch sharing plan is open up to 3 days per week, which can include 1 weekday and 1 weekend day. The South Coast, which is Westport, is open in early May. And again, also this flexibility to open on April 30th if that falls on a Thursday. And then in April, May, and June, open up to 3 days per week with the weekday and weekend day provision as well. And then the Columbia River, which we also coordinate with Oregon, because the area we have, the Columbia River area is from Ledbetter Point in Washington down to Cape Falcon. We have that fishery open in May, flexibility to open on April 30th. And then we specify that those would be open up to 3 days per week, Thursday or Friday and or Sunday. So this is the starting point when we developed the range of alternatives that were presented to the council in September. And I'll just give you all here an update on where we are with the 23 halibut catch. And I did update this through September 30th. So this is through the end of the season. The North Coast caught 123,288 pounds out of the 129,688 pound quota, leaving 6,380 pounds remaining. So they caught 95% of their sub-area allocation. The Puget Sound caught 52,130 pounds of their 79,031 pound quota, which was 66% of the allocation. The South Coast of Westport caught 70,152 pounds of halibut out of the 64,376 allocation. So 109% of their sub-area allocation. Columbia River caught 15,737 pounds out of their, well, that doesn't include the Oregon pounds. So in total, well, I'm not going to do the math here. I'll just skip to the Columbia River, when Oregon pounds are included, caught 105% of their sub-area allocation. And so in total, in Washington, for the sport fishery, we caught 91% of our allocation, leaving less than 30,000 pounds of the allocation untaken, unharvested by the end of the season on September 30th. And just to note, for folks who haven't been tracking this all along, the catch in the South Coast and the Columbia River were, even though it shows that they exceeded their sub-allocation, it was done, additional days were added to those areas at the end, acknowledging that it was using quota from the North Coast and Puget Sound that weren't going to take their full allocation. So it provided, this is where we're talking about spreading opportunity out toward the end of the season to as many sub areas as possible to take our allocation if we're not going to have caught it in May or June. So this slide here has a couple of graphics on it. If you can see it here up in the right-hand corner, the black line I'll start with here is our allocation for the Washington sport quota. Here you can see this is 2019, where we've had that 1.65 million pound quota. And then here is our catch relative to our quota. The quota is reflected in this shaded box here. So you can see in these years here, we were a little bit over our quota. And since 2019 and the pandemic, this is 2020 and 2021, where we had the ports of, well, 2020, just the pandemic affected every single port and every fishery in many ways. And then in addition to just the effect of fishery closure and change of the season that we had in 2020, the ports of Neah Bay and La Push were closed to protect those communities during the pandemic. And they were closed into 2021. So we're just rebounding, I would say, from the pandemic here. And you can see that a little bit of information here. You can see that where we were over on our quota was really, this is the Puget Sound area, which up until 2016, we didn't have the tools to manage that on an in-season basis. We were estimating the amount of halibut that would be caught, and we were getting our catch at the end of the season. And so in 2016, we brought in an in-season management tool that allows us to track the quota weekly and do a better job of managing that quota. So,
hey, Heather, you got a time for a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for just shouting.
So on this chart, you're showing for Puget Sound, the blue line for this year, that the quota attainment was a little bit over 80%, but yet the figures that you just previously showed us were that we left 35% of our quota on the table. So those two aren't matching up.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure what is happening there. So, but that's a good point, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take a closer look at that. I'm not sure what's happening on that, but you're right. we did the catch on that previous slide is showing that the Puget Sound catch was 66% of the quota. So that is more accurate than what's on here. So then moving on to the options that came out of our discussion in August and what the council adopted for public review. For Puget Sound, we had 3 options that we left the meeting with that the council approved. That is option 1, that would open Puget Sound, which is marine areas 5 and marine areas 6 through 10 on April 4th, 7 days per week through June 30th. And then option 2 was an option. This was a proposal that came forward to open marine areas 6 through 10, which is the eastern portion of Puget Sound, in February or March, 7 days per week through June 30th, and open marine area 5 on April 1, 7 days per week through June 30th. And then what we discussed is that if the 2024 FCEY for Area 2A, or our quota for 2A, is below 1.3 million pounds, then the option 3 would be to open April 4th, 5 days per week through June 30th. And I'll just pause here for a second to say that the consistent Area 2A quota of 1.65 million pounds, or it's actually 1.5 million pounds is the quota, has been in place since 2019. It's an agreement that the commissioners had in place for 2019 through 2022 for 4 years. And then they did adopt it again for 2023 at the annual meeting. But there was a lot of discussion around that decision. The halibut stock has over the entire area showing a little bit of decline. There's some uncertainties in the stock, and so there was an interest in being precautionary. And in many of the areas that I showed you on that graphic outside of 2A, all except for one, I believe, took a quota in 2023 that was a reduction. So a lot of areas took a reduction. It was challenging to make the argument that Area 2A shouldn't also take a reduction, although we did see our weight per unit effort in our commercial fisheries had increased. We also have, put forward in our rationale for maintaining a consistent Area 2A that we are the tail end of the range, and that a consistent quota of 1.65 million pounds or 1.5 million pounds really doesn't have an effect on the overall stock within the full range. But I think we all recognize that those conversations will continue to be challenging as we get the stock assessment for 2023 and prepare for the 2024 annual meeting. And so this option 3 that you'll see here, and it's option 2 on the North Coast, recognizes that we may have something lower than 1.5 million pounds to work with. So for the North Coast, the range of options that were put out, option 1 would be opening May 2nd through May 20th, 5 days per week, Thursday through Monday, and then on Friday and Sunday for Memorial Day weekend, and then 5 days per week, Thursday through Monday, through the end of June, after Memorial Day through the end of June. Option 2, if the 2A FCEY is below 1.3 million pounds, then that would go to 4 days per week, rather than the 5 days per week. The South Coast,
Heather,
Yep.
I'm sorry, the acronym FCEY, can you define it for me?
yeah, that's the fishery constant exploitable yield. So I'm using FCEY and quota kind of interchangeable here. The FCEY is what's available to the fishery. So it's the quota that we would be managing to. And then that 1.3 million pounds or the 1.5 million pounds is broken down into the sub area quotas that we're talking about. But you can think of it really as the quota that we're managing to for area 2A.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
You're
clear.
welcome. Yeah, okay, you're welcome. So the South Coast, the proposed option here is to open May 2nd through May 21, 3 days per week. And then open on Thursday, May 23rd of the Memorial Day weekend. And then there are 8 days here proposed that the South Coast would be open if there's quota remaining. So these dates are announced in advance so that people can plan. If there isn't enough quota for the 8 days, then they may not be open. But at least it puts them out there. This is a change from this year where we had just 6 days that were noticed in advance. And then for the Columbia River, this would open May 2nd, 3 days per week, also Thursday, Sunday, and Tuesday, and then open on Thursday and Sunday, Memorial Day weekend. And then in May, open 3 days per week again, Thursday, Sunday, and Tuesday. So those are the options that are out for public review. And really, one of the things that we need to accomplish by the end of this meeting is to select the preferred option to present the council in November. And so I'm just gonna, this next slide here, I just want to go through. Oh, I did see a hand up. Go back. Sorry, I didn't catch.
Yeah,
Zach.
that's
Zach.
me. Thank you. What is the modeled savings for closing the 5 days a week versus 7 days a week in Puget Sound? Like you're taking 2 days out of the week, but since they are like weekdays, how much of the, what is the sort of estimated catch reduction?
Yeah, we didn't do that analysis for here. Back when we were only open a couple of days a week, we definitely gone through the analysis of, what kind of savings would we get. The approach we've sort of landed on relies less on that kind of an analysis and more on what we've heard from the public is to front load our catch early in the season. And there's interest in having some opportunity in August and September as a mop-up, but really the idea is just getting as much of the allocation taken early in the season than the end, and then the recognition if the quota for area 2A is less than what we've been what we've had since 2019, then we probably need to pull back on the number of days per week. So it's really just that simple, Zach. There's
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay.
Also, I'm sure we'll get into discussing more later, but I also agree with the whole front loading thing, especially because we have that in-season management ability now.
Yep. Okay, thanks. And then Steve, did I see your hand go up?
Yes, I was going to say thank you for that comment, because what you said is exactly correct for the charter businesses. That helps to front load the season for our constituents, for our folks, rather than later in the summer when tuna is going on and salmon, etc. So I appreciate that remark that you said.
Okay, you got it. So really, I mean, when we're looking at these, the only area that has any place that we really need to narrow, unless others have some other input, is the Puget Sound, and this idea of opening in February or March under option 2. For the North Coast, where we have an option 1 and 2, I think we can put both of those forward. And then when we do know the quota, that will determine which one of the options goes forward into the federal rule and then in our state rule. So the South Coast and the Columbia River, there's no alternatives other than what we have presented here. So the biggest discussion point I think we have to get around is the Puget Sound options. And I highlighted 1 and 3, and I just wanted to follow up on when we talked about this option of opening in February or March at our August meeting. There was some folks very much wanting to get the fishery started that early. Again, this is an area where we aren't fully taking the allocation, but I also noted that I was unsure about how that would work through the regulatory process. And what I mentioned earlier, in how National Marine Fisheries Service takes not only what we put forward to our catch sharing plan for federal regulation, but they also take the outcome of the IPHC annual meeting and adopt those quotas and allocations into federal rules. So the input I got from NIMS on their really the regulatory challenges, or I mean, maybe more strongly as actual barriers, is that NIMS can't set those area specific season dates until the allocations are implemented through the IPHC are established. And then that usually happens in a joint NIMS Alaska region and West Coast region rule. And then because the annual meeting occurs in late January, the rule isn't usually effective until the end of February or early March. And then the catch share rule, which would open the Washington sports season, needs to follow that rule. And although it could potentially publish shortly after the IPHC regulation, it's really probably not possible to have it effective immediately. So it puts us more in the late March or early April timeframe that we've been in recent years. And I think even last year we were, with our early April opening, we were, because if folks remember the year before that, I think we were in mid-April. We've gradually moved from this May opening cautiously to earlier in April with some uncertainty about how much that would increase our catch. We've been lucky that it's been fine, and we haven't just blown through that Puget Sound quota with that early April opening. So again, this is why we could at least consider the March or February alternative. But again, at least for 2024, it's not something that we can have in place through the federal rules. So Mike, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to step out for just a second there, so I didn't catch all of the last 5 minutes or so there, but I just wanted to speak to the option 2, and I think you just gave a little bit of the background, what's been going on there. As recently as 2018, our halibut season year started in early May, and some of us up here in this area started advocating for earlier season openings because we weren't catching our quota, And because blackmouth fishing opportunity had been taken off the table, so looking for an opportunity to get out on the water earlier in the year. So I just, and it has been moving forward earlier, like you said, and we still have 35% of our quota on the table this year. So we continue to push for earlier openings, primarily really hoping to be able to fish before the longliners, have an opportunity before longliners start fishing in early March up in this area. So we know that in February and March, there's not going to be that many days that are going to be able to be fished because of the weather. So we don't think that the impact is going to be that much. Might get us closer to the quota. And, if we do towards the end of the season, if we do get to our quota, then, there's emergency closures are used probably a few times a week in various fisheries here. That's how WDFW manages. So, and the last thing I'll point out is I did read these three options off to our group membership at our last meeting, and we had a unanimous vote for option 2. That would be 75 votes for option 2 for Puget Sound.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Glenn, do you want to have comment? Then I'm going to fill Mike in on what he might have missed.
Yeah. Last time we talked, we were talking about you were going to check into the ability to write into the plan that we'd have more of a, I don't want to say a say, but to where we can move our dates around without going through the federal process. Was there any outcome on that?
Yeah, a good question. So in the allocation discussion that we're having, that's where we're talking about a lot of this flexibility idea in moving quota around. In terms of moving dates around, the more that we can put in this federal rule, Glenn, is really what we need to do. So we need to describe it. We can't just say we're going to open in April 7 days a week and then open 3 days a week or do something like that. It's just it's different than salmon. It's a different management structure, and we don't have that kind of flexibility for halibut. So we need to be very clear. We need to be providing the transparency with what we're intending to do. So 7 days per week through June, I think.
Well, which I agree with the 7 days per week, but at the same time, with California on our heels trying to take some of our quota, I mean, their inability to let us do that in a timely fashion is making it so we can't reach our quota. I mean, so their own rules are inhibiting us to get our quota in a timely manner. So I'm kind of hoping that's kind of brought up to them during this battle with California going after our halibut quota. It's their own rules that are hamstringing us to get our quota.
Well, I guess for Puget Sound and under option 1 of 7 days a week, there would be no holding back.
Yeah, but at the same time, if they get the rule placed in in January, March, we don't have the ability, okay, let's open up on March 15th, because of that time frame. So their rules are inhibiting us from getting our quota. And I kind of was hoping that will go forward in the future meetings with PFMC.
Okay.
As an argument against California taking our quota, our Washington quota.
Okay.
But I'm in support of option 1 at this point. If we can definitely get some more movement, without having going through this federal process like this, to where we can come back and say, hey, let's open up in the middle of March. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, the rules are federal rules that we're managing under, and there's no getting out from under the federal process. But if there's a way where we can maybe make a change to the catch sharing plan, and I'm not sure what this would look like, but I'm happy to try to dig into that more. I don't think it's something we can do for 2024, but if there's a way to, and this is what I'm not sure how we would do that for the next year.
It's the same thing for the South Coast, and we're sitting on this quota up here in Puget Sound, and the North Coast is sitting on extra quota. I mean, this year would have been a perfect example. Last week we should have gone in there and say, hey, let's open up for the last 5 days of September, or the last 7 days in September in Area 2 to get some of that quota. But we're not able to do that. We should be able to do that.
I think with enough notice, we can do those kinds of things. And it's just a matter of providing the notice, of trying to continue to have our check-ins. We usually have one after Memorial Day. What's it looking like? Is there an opportunity to add some more days to the South Coast or the Columbia River? When we set our late season dates and all of that, do we add it in there when we work with NIMS over the month of July, so that we've got the dates outlined for August and September? So I hear you what you're saying, and I know there are some limitations to how flexible we can be with these federal rules, and I'm happy to help work with them. And that's where I think it's really important for the Columbia River and the North Coast to consider these being open 5 days per week from the get-go, rather than last year, where the North Coast was only open 2 days per week. So be open 5 days per week right from the start. That's where I think we can do better on our end. And then we can also work with NIMS to provide notice on where we want to add days as soon as possible, as soon as we know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. So Mike, what I was running through, where maybe you missed what I was explaining, was my follow-up with NIMS after our meeting in August, and what it means through the regulatory process to open the season in February. So the first thing that NIMS does following the annual meeting, which is the last week of January, the annual meeting is where the quotas are set for the entire IPHC area, including 2A. So that's, they can't set those season dates until the allocations are implemented through the IPHC regulations. And then again, like I said, that happens through a joint Alaska region and West Coast region rule. And then that rule isn't usually effective until the end of February or March. And then the rule that opens the Washington sports season follows that rule. And so even if it could publish shortly after the IPHC regulations, it's really not possible to have it effective immediately. So it really puts things at that late March, early April timeframe.
So how is it that the longliners manage to fish in early March then, year after year in this area?
I think that's a good question. And I think the way that it's spelled out in the catch sharing plan is something that we would need to talk to NIMS about. Is there a way to set that kind of process up so that we can look at that in the future?
Yeah, I would say, I understand there's a process, bureaucratic process that has to be followed, but our input then would be open it up as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if the longliners are able to do it in early March somehow, then, let's open the sports season at the same time. That would be our input.
Okay. I don't know if Mel or Heather want to chime in here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you have anything you want to share at this point. I can follow up with you after the meeting too, to see what kind of options we have. But I do hear you, Mike, and I think Glenn, you're saying the same thing, is open. I think you're saying open marine areas 5 through 10 as soon as possible.
No, that's not really what I'm saying. I just want the state to have the ability to make those decisions on the fly and not have to be hamstrung.
Okay.
Opening up in February, no, I'm not in favor. I wouldn't
Okay.
be in favor of that. That's too big of a leap.
Yeah.
Adding 60 days to the fishery is too big of a leap. Even though we have 35% left over, that's just too big of a leap. I'm more inclined to do baby steps to follow our baseline that we've established.
Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha. I appreciate that. Well, I can definitely reflect that in our recommendation for November.
You got a few hands up.
Oh, thank you. I only see one, so. Whoever wants to go first, I can't see your hand, but I'll just ask you to go ahead.
It's Dave Johnson, Dave Kroonquist, and Zach in that order.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Hey,
Go
Heather,
ahead.
this is Dave.
Hi, Dave.
I just wanted some clarification because in our August meeting, we're all in favor on the North Coast for just staying status quo 2 days a week until we know what the quota is and we know what our traffic's going to be like up on the North Coast. We want to stay conservative. And it was agreed in August that we were going to be Thursdays, Saturdays through the whole month of May, except for Memorial Day weekend, Friday and Sunday. And we wanted these extra days added in there so we had the flexibility to add more in June. So it didn't take you and I 3 weeks to add those extra days we've done the last 2 years in June. So that's my concern, because everybody I talk to on the 6-pack charters and everybody else on the North Coast wants to stay conservative in the month of May and then have the flexibility and the tools in the tool chest so we don't have to wait 3 weeks like we've done in the past to add those extra days in June. And that's what we really want to do on the North Coast, is stay conservative and then be more liberal if we have a quota. We don't want to end it up in 6 days or 5 days like we have in the past. But we want to be able to catch our quota, and we always share our quota with Westport and everybody else. And that's what we really were adamant about in August. And that's what we're going to be adamant about again tonight, is we want to be 2 days a week in the month of May and then have the flexibility to add days in June if we need to quickly instead of waiting 3 weeks.
That's what I kind of remember it as, that way too, having the ability to add the days.
And yeah, and same with Puget Sound, except, and especially in Area 5, because there's no way Glenn and Brandon are going to put their docks in March and April with that storms. I mean, I pulled my boat this week because that northeast wind was just beating my boat up on the dock. So, and beating up their docks. So that's what we talked about in August. And that's what we want again this year.
Lorna and I got that wrong. And I'll just tell you. In order for, we don't, having that kind of flexibility to go from saying we're open 2 days per week in Memorial Day to then, no, now we want to be open 5 days per week in June. NIMS can't make those kind of changes that quickly. And that's why we were suggesting doing, or that's why the whole conversation came up about 5 days, starting with 5 days per week. I don't know, Dave, would, and others from the North Coast, would, if we revised option 1 to be open May 2nd through May whatever, 2 days per week, and then May 30th through June whatever, open 5 days per week.
I'd be more comfortable at 4. And I'm sure Jim and
So-
Randy and Todd and everybody else would chime in and do the same thing.
So we can't ask for like 4 or 5 days, but then do an in-season management through WDFW and leave it at 2 or 3 days?
No,
Even, okay, it don't work the same way as salmon does then.
right.
But
Right.
would they, if we were going to go over our quota, would they expect us to pull the trigger right now and close it?
Yeah,
So we can close it on a fly, but we can't go in and do a schedule closure later. I mean, we can't say 5 days a week, but we're decided, 3 weeks down the road, we're going to be closed on 3 of those days instead.
right.
Yeah, so on the North Coast, Heather, that's what we talked about in August, was doing 2 days a week in the month of May. And then going 3 or 4 days a week in June, if we have quota and low effort. Because we want to extend our season. We don't want to just eat it all up real quick.
Mhm.
And that's
And
what we
that's-
talked about in August.
Yeah, and that's where the FCEY came into play, not knowing if we're going to have, 1.5, 1.3, or 1. I mean, it's hard to say what we want to do if we don't know those numbers, and that's why we was looking for that ability to make those changes on the fly based on that information that we don't get until January.
Yeah, or February, exactly.
Okay. So if under 1.5, under status quo 1.5, if we did May 2 days per week and June 4 days per week, and if it's 1.3 or below 1.3, then we would do 2 days per week and 3 days per week.
Correct.
Okay.
Hey, Heather, this is Mike again.
Go ahead, Mike.
So since some of the federal players are on this call, and since it seems like their rulemaking process is really hamstringing our ability to do in-season management, can they address why that is? Why we can't have flexibility? I mean, is there a good reason for it, or is it just because this is the way we've always done it?
I'll certainly leave room for Heather and Mel to chime in, but the way, my understanding is that when we're setting up these season dates and rules, this is, letting the public know what the intention is for the season dates. And if we're going to deviate from what that is, there needs to be notice to the public of why we're making that change. And that is what takes time, is to, even though they're doing it in the 6-week period, it takes time to get the rule in place. I think if we had a very detailed, if the quota is this much at the end of May, then the season dates for June would be these dates. If the quota is this much at the end of May, then the season dates for June would be these dates. If we spelled it out like that. I think maybe that's getting to it. It's not something that we can just, as we kind of have been doing, getting together in May or early June and seeing where we are and then deciding. But if we had it very prescriptive in the catch sharing plan, so people knew what was happening when, then I think that's what NIMS is looking for. And again, if there's a hand up, somebody let me know.
Heather,
Yeah,
I don't have my hand up, but I have
Okay.
I don't know if this helps or not. Just Phil. But what you can do, I think, and I'll put it in the form of a question, is that, you know, pick an area. I'll just pick North Coast just for sake of example. You can have in our preseason plan a 2-day-a-week fishery in May, and you can also have let's just say a 3-day-a-week fishery in June.
Mhm.
And you can set it up that way. But the way that would play out is if you go all the way through June, you're 3 days a week, and you don't run out of quota, you're fine. But if in the middle of June or some period in June you run out of fish, you can fish those 3 days a week until you run out of North Coast quota.
Mhm.
Right? So you
Right.
could set it up that way, but what you can't do, and you've said this, is you can't get into June and say, well, instead of 3 days a week, we want to go to 2 days a week. You can't do that quickly because of the federal regulatory process.
Right.
And, you know, we're in salmon, when we're just dealing with the state process, you can, you know, file an emergency reg and walk across the street to the code revisor and have it done in a matter of hours. But with the federal process, you can't do that. And so, but that is to say that if you want 2 days a week in June, or excuse me, 2 days a week in May and 3 days a week in June, you can set it up like that.
Mhm.
And it will run until you run out of fish. You can't make quick changes in terms of the number of days per week in season. That's where you run into problems.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Or even in the case of what happened this year, I think is, you know, wanting to go from 2 days a week to 4 days a week quickly in June. That's what we couldn't do, which is why I guess what we were hearing was maybe more of a front load. So I think what we can do is do for May 2 days a week, and then June 4 days a week under the higher allocation. And then if the quota is 1.3 million pounds or lower, then it would be 2 days a week in May and 3 days a week in June.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather.
Okay, you got it.
Hey,
And-
Heather, I can try to watch the hands for you if you want.
oh, thanks, Ann.
It looks like Dave Kronquist is next.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, Heather, a little background. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that the longliners that fish Puget Sound are all tribal. The non-tribal commercial, halibut commercial, is south of Point Chehalis or whatever it is down there at
Yep.
Westport.
Yeah.
So it's all the longliners in Puget Sound are tribal. Per the federal regulations, they can start fishing anytime after, I believe it's March 1st, and they set their own seasons and bag limits. So, you know, that's a whole different ballgame to look at. As far as
Yeah, you have that right, Dave.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then as far as access issues, option one, I think it would probably appeal to most of the folks in 6 and probably 5. It's been mentioned that the docks don't hold up very well in the easterly winds, and there's not a lot of access in 5 and 6 during February, March, and April's better. If we start with 5 days a week or 7 days a week, that's good. Under general construction of federal rules and state rules, the states can be more restrictive than the feds. So if the feds would give us 7 days a week to work within, a discussion to have with them, and Ann probably needs to jump in on this too. We have to monitor the catch. You folks have to provide the creel check folks and how accessible they're going to be to cover Puget Sound area. If we're going to start that early, that's going to be an additional added expense, and the more we can drive things into a later season that may overlap with other seasons, the better it's going to be. So I guess option one, to me, I think looks probably best for most of the folks in Puget Sound.
Thank you, Dave. And what you're saying about sampling and getting that that in place for an opening in February, March is not insignificant. Is it doable? Maybe. Do we have the resources to pay for the overflights and having the samplers in every station that we need to have them in to have the good estimates that we have? Is not insignificant. So even though I pointed to the real challenge with getting a federal rule in place before March, it's not insignificant to have the sampling structure in place at that time. And I know Ann and our ocean sampling program, similarly, hiring and staffing has been challenging since the pandemic. It's not getting any easier. And so it's a fair point, and I think one important one to make.
Hey, Heather, just a quick counterpoint to that. I mean, I hear what you're saying and I recognize it, but the fact is that we used to have blackmouth fishing and we had people checking and overflights and all of that. And that all went away, but the price of our licenses has not decreased, reflecting that. So, that money is still there. It's just being used for something else, apparently. So it could go back to being used what it was being used with or for several years there.
I'll just say a couple things here. So, with the new biennium, trying to line up, the staff seasons with the fishery season. So definitely paying very close attention to when this fishery might start, so we can get people on prior to April 4th, if that ends up being the opening date. And right now, because the Chinook fishery in 5 is slated to open April 1, we will have staff on also for the halibut fishery. So, and then also another point that Sam on our staff is also reminding me of even today, we didn't get a flight in because of weather. And so you're looking at February, especially, our ability to get flights in would be very difficult. But yeah, I'm paying close attention to the funding for the staffing and making sure we have the staff in place when it's needed. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But unless somebody, I think Zach might have been next.
Okay.
If there's no other comments there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm generally in favor for Puget Sound just starting as early as possible, but I do think that starting that option 1 early, April 4th or whatever, or April 1st, 7 days a week is a good reasonable step in sort of ratcheting things up year after year. I think I'd be hard pressed to, I'd rather certainly start as early as possible. I know, that's the case for some other folks in Puget Sound, particularly. I know some of the folks that maybe fish, area that are running from, or that are running from sort of inner Puget Sound, those areas like 9 and 10, the Everett-based fleet where, fishing either the farthest east in the strait or fishing, whether, Mutiny Bay or Admiralty Bay, those couple of Area 9 spots that are really, best at the very beginning of the season, that those earlier days do matter there. But so the last question I had is sort of trying to understand this whole management framework. Is this the type of thing where we can wrap our season around into the following year to get access to those, for salmon management, which, I know these are different, but just, there's the structure is such that you set the seasons sort of from May 1st to the following April 30th, because that's where we're scheduling the winter blackmouth seasons for the following year. Is this situation for halibut where we are setting our schedule from March 1st through the following February 28th or 20, and where if we wanted to give ourselves the option of opening early next year, we can put in a month in February or put in a month in March. And, if we do that now, there's certainly from the time that anything closes like September 30th, the time crunch is no longer an issue if we need to take that off or whatever. We've got 6 months to do so. And just wondering if that is something that if we want to just give ourselves more flexibility for next year, that if we can get that on the books now, so that at this time next year, we already approved for that. And it's just a question of whether we want to, stick with it or not have that opening then. And just so that we're not having a conversation about us versus the regulators, the regulators, it's more a question of just what do we want to do.
I think what you're saying, Zach, I think if there is a way to open earlier than April, I think that you're getting at where the solution is. And and what that looks like, I'm not sure, but I think if that's what we need to explore a little bit more, is, if there's an interest in that, how do we build it in so that it's doable? And that's something I would need to look into more.
It looks like Steve Westrick has his hand up next.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, hello, you got me?
Yep.
Okay, first off, I don't usually meddle in other areas' rules because I'm pretty much mind my own business and do my own thing. And Dave, I love you, but I'm really disappointed that North Coast wants to go to 2 days a week, and they have the biggest allocation and they haven't caught it. And why are they being conservative in May? Well, my conspiracy theory is you got more effort coming to Westport then, because we're 3 days a week, and they want to save, sorry, Dave, your fishery for June, maybe when the weather's better and it's better for 6-packs. And that does not sit well with me. I'm sorry. There's already been a massive effort shift, and we're trying to go 3 days a week so we can catch our fish, and you guys still didn't catch your fish, and now you want to be at 2 days a week. I do not understand that. I could see, I'm reading your option. The option 1 was for 5 days a week. I thought that was way liberal. I mean, if I'm there and I have a bigger charter boat, not a 6-pack, I'd be maybe 5 days a week would be pretty good, but even 3 or 4. But I am not just voicing my displeasure with the North Coast not at least going 3 days per week to try to attain their quota. Back in the day, it was, when there were larger charter boats there, the fishery was more May, and then whatever went on after that happened. But it seems like they're really moving away from that. And to me, it seems like it's a 6-pack deal versus a larger boat. But that's my thought. I wish that area would at least be 3 days a week to spread out the catch effort. If you're a person, I might be all wrong, You know, my head's buzzing a little bit, but you know, this area is, I can go 3 days a week. And if I go to North Coast, which is a hell of a lot farther drive from somebody from Olympia or wherever than just going to Westport for 3 days a week, I'd probably go to Westport, which, you know, and there's already been a big effort shift to Westport, and whatever you say, but that's what's happened with the COVID and everything. But I wish they would reconsider that, or at least I wish I would have been more involved in August, because I see for May this year, there's 10 possible days in May, or last year there was 11. I mean, we probably should have been on the bandwagon to at least get the 28th and the 30th in our area, in the Westport area. But that's my thing. Sorry, Dave and PSA, but I think you guys should be at least 3 days a week, because I don't believe you're going to, you know, if the quota stays at 1.5, we're going to have the same thing, and you're going to get your fishery in June. It sounds like. It seems like that's what you want. But, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, thanks,
Sorry.
Steve.
Can I jump in?
Thanks, Steve. I understand. I'm
I
just
think Brandon
pointing
was
out what
next.
the constituents want in area 3 and 4. And the constituents that have talked to me would like to stay at 2 days. And so that's what I'm just following what the constituents have asked me to propose to WDFW. I just got a text from Uncle Phil, and I understand.
Why 2 days a week? I don't get that. Are you really think you're going to have a lot of business or that much business and close down early? Really? I mean,
Well,
It's
we have
happened in the past.
Yes. Yeah.
We've had a
You have in the
5
past.
and 6
I
day
don't think
season
you
in the
can
North
pass
Hey,
the
Coast.
face test on that deal.
Heather, I hate to jump
understand,
ahead.
Steve.
Who's talking?
Can I interject something from the GAP proposal, from the GAP environment? Paul?
Oh, okay, Paul.
Yeah, I hate to jump ahead of these guys. I just want to augment something here. From my experience at the GAP, we had really better focus on getting our quota in the barn, because they're looking at everything they can to say that you guys aren't catching your quota. That's number one. Number two, and I quote, they say we want 100,000 pounds back from 2 set line surveys. They're adamant about that. And I'm up against like a 1 against 7 in that GAP meeting. I'm not complaining, but I wish I could have done a better job. But I've talked, and they won't innovate anything. I'm going to add that to you. So it might be a roll of the dice for the North Coast to go 3 days. But if at this point, I would, to make darn sure you get your quota in the barn. I'm delighted to see that everything got cut up. I hope Puget Sound with some liberal regulations could gain more too, because that's only going to help us. And it's great to show that what I've said on 2 testimonies, that Washington does not have anything to give to anybody. And we better demonstrate that fact, even if I'd roll the dice and go for 3 days up there. And that's my comment based on what I hear at the GAP meetings. And that's what I'm up against, so to speak, you might say. So take that into account too. And I just wanted to share that experience with you guys.
Thank you, Paul. I know you've got to leave here at 6. So I also saw
I want
Brandon,
to say something
who's
too
been
to Paul.
patiently waiting to talk. Brandon.
Yeah, this is Brandon. For what Paul had to say right there, hopefully he's still on the line. We've been asking for 6 fish limit for the last few years, and we were turned down by WDFW, and we had to keep a 4 fish limit. If we would have had a 6 fish limit, that would have ate our quota up a heck of a lot faster. So that one right there maybe falls on WDFW's hands a little bit, because we were all pushing for 6 fish.
No, not everybody was pushing for 6 fish. I mean, you can put anything on me, Brandon, but I did not hear a unanimous advocation for a 6 fish limit. I did not hear that ever. I heard some
That came from the
pros
North
and
Coast.
cons.
Yep, North Coast and Puget Sound wanted 6 fish.
It's not,
But-
I didn't hear a strong
Well-
consensus for 6 fish. I heard a lot of pros and cons for a 6 fish annual limit. I think what we did, and I'm interested in hearing about this, by going to 6 fish in August and September might have helped with that, but I definitely didn't hear a unanimous vote for going to a 6 fish annual bag limit.
Yeah, this is Mike. I'm going to back Heather up on that. I remember the discussion about that. We've had the discussion for about a year and a half, and there definitely were at least a few people who said stick with the 4, and I was one of them. There was at least a few others for Puget Sound.
So I also want to acknowledge the time. I do think we're having a good conversation. I think I understand where North Coast wants to go. I'd have to say I'm a little bit in the camp of not understanding completely why sticking with 2 days a week in May makes sense to the North Coast, but I hear that being represented as a pretty consistent vote or input from that area.
I think it really depends on the amount of quota we get, Heather. That was the big issue. Not knowing how much fish we get and what has happened in the past is where we were getting at. And I do appreciate everybody else's comments, and it does make total sense to, if we get the same amount to do 3-4 days in May, start right out. But if we don't know what it is and we lose the 1.5, I mean, we're down to where we need to take action.
So for now, I'm hearing the recommendation for the North Coast is May, no matter what, 2 days per week. If the quota is 1.5, you'll go to 4 days per week in June. And if it's 1.3 or less, you'll go to 3 days per week in June, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that sounds real good.
Okay. Flexibility for marine areas 6 through 10 to open as early as possible is what we're looking for, but also at a minimum, option 1, open 7 days per week. If the 2A FCEY is below 1.3, open 5 days per week. Just want to confirm that's the direction for the Puget Sound.
I think that would work for us.
Okay. So I do.
If that we can do for 24, then we'll go with it. We'll continue the march to earlier in the year as long as we can, as long as the quota sustains it.
Okay. Yeah, and Mike, I know you've been bringing that idea to the table, so thank you for that, and appreciate, as we work through what that might look like. It's a little bit out of the box, but it doesn't mean we just can say no. So I'll explore that. Go ahead, Steve.
So then, is it too late if North Coast sticks with their 2 day a week option? Is it too late for us, for South Coast, to add, or however you want to say it, the 28th, which is a Tuesday, and the 30th of May, Thursday, May 30th, the 28th and the 30th? I mean, they're promoting to have their halibut fishery in June. we are promoting to have our halibut fishery in May. You know, the larger charter boats, not talking about the 6-packs, the larger charter boats. And that's who I'm in the camp with. And I think it would not be beneficial to have those 2 days also then in May. And leave the days you have alone for us set up for June. I mean, like Paul said, he's right. If you don't catch your quota again, how can you not relinquish some to the south? You know, I don't get it. So anyway, that I would request that for our area, if they're going to stick with their 2 days, if we're changing the options, to add the 28th and the 30th for South Coast.
Can I jump in and give you a little bit of observation at the GAP meeting to make sure that you guys understand what we're up against? I'm not telling anything that didn't happen, but there was comments made. Well, we don't want Washington to schedule more days so that California doesn't get any. Now, that's what they were telling. That's what they were saying. So that's the attitude we're up against. And I observed it. I'm not saying anything that isn't true. So like I say, right now, at this point in time in our historical fishery, it's really important that we do everything we can in a very shrewd way to catch that quota. And I'm, you know, that's just one example of what, you know, what the proposals come from the Groundfish Advisory Panel, what they're saying. I will say that the Groundfish Advisory Panel's report, it was good that the guy, the vice chairman, did emphasize, or he made a point to say that there wasn't a consensus of everybody in that meeting, because I wasn't in favor of hardly anything that GAP report was all about. Oregon and Washington did have an input in saying that we are not in favor of any allocation shift. And of course, my testimony was that I don't want to give anything to California until I see some innovation on their part to make their seasons last longer, what we've been doing for the last 30 years or more. So those are just some things that I want to shed the light on you guys, as far as when you decide what you want for public review, as far as the importance of attaining that quota utilization. We started off kind of an anomaly that was kind of strange last year, starting off not catching right away. That was like the last thing we needed, but I'm glad to see that, you know, things caught up pretty good. And so, yeah, and the only other comment I can make is in the Puget Sound, if there's any way for those guys to attain more, that's going to help us a lot. But that's just, I think it's important to tell you what's been going on at the GAP meetings, which then goes on before the council. And yeah, that's all I got there, Heather.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Well, Steve, going back to Steve, I'm just going to respond to Steve Hill really quick. And I know I would really like to move on to the allocation discussion here too. But Steve, I don't think your request is out of bounds. You're basically just extending the 3-day per week concept through the end of May, with the exception of Memorial Day weekend, where you wouldn't be open.
Correct.
That
Yes.
Sunday really is all it is. Is everyone on board for that? On board with that?
I agree 100% with Steve and Paul, and we've all talked on the phone. And I'm just providing what the constituents of the North Coast have asked me to provide to you guys. And that's what they're saying, is they would like to stay the 2 days a week in May, conservatively, until we know what the quota is. If it's 1.5, I'm all game for 3 days a week, not a problem. And I'm sure the other constituents that are on here with Tom and Randy and Jim and everybody else would do the same. But we don't know. It's just an unknown. And we do need to catch our quota, and we always share it. So Steve, I'm all for it, buddy.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Okay. Then I just heard you say something different than what you've been saying. Well, and maybe I just need to add something to it. So option 1, option one does assume 1.5. And maybe that's not very clear because we haven't spelled it out like we do if it's below 1.3. So if we spelled out, if, you know, equal to or greater than 1.5, the North Coast would be 3 days per
3 days
week.
a week. Yep.
And then what do you want in May? 4?
We would be 3 days a week in May.
Yeah. And then in June, sorry,
Go 4.
4. If you've got 1.5, okay.
Correct.
And if it's between, so if it's 1.5, if it's 1.3 to 1.5, you're going to do 3 days in May, 4 days in June. If it's 1.3 or less, then you want to do 2 days in May and 3 days in June.
Correct.
All right. Well, okay. If we get 1.5, then you're starting with 3 days a week, not 2, and going to
Correct.
4 in June. If it's 1.3 or less, then you're 2 days a week and 3 days in June.
Correct.
Okay.
But like that commissioner, the new commissioner from Canada, you listened to it, I listened to it, we all did that were on the call.
Yeah.
You know, he was adamant that we were way out of line. And so I don't know what we're going to get come
Yeah.
January, February.
Okay. I got you, Dave.
And I also listened to Marcy wanting to go 7 days a week, 2 fish per day from California last month.
Okay. Randy, do you want to add anything to this? Or is your hand just still up?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is even if it is below, using up the quota in June with 4 days. Try to get through it. No matter what, just 4 days, whatever the quota is in June.
So you and Dave have a different idea about what you want to do in June.
I agree with Randy. That's fine. 4 days a week in June is fine if we have the quota. Not a problem.
No, Randy said
No matter
even
what.
regardless of what the quota is, he wants 4 days in June.
If it's 1.3 or 1.0, let's go 4 days a week in June.
Okay.
Heather?
4 days in June, no matter what.
Sure.
Gotcha. I got it. Was that you, Brandon?
I think you got Brandon, and then Glenn had his hand up for a while, but maybe he gave up. And then Dave Johnson.
I apologize. This is Tom Ronge. I just can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I agree with what just happened.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I appreciate knowing that.
Yeah, this is Brandon. I agree with everything too. And I like option 1 as well for Puget Sound. And
Okay.
then did we talk anything about start date for if there was remaining quota in August?
We have not. Right now, what we'll do, Brandon, is get together in June, and that gives us enough time to figure out exactly what the right date is.
Okay, and then we're going to start off as a 6 fish limit for all the halibut fishermen then, right?
Yeah, we haven't got to that, but that isn't what I heard. But we can use the 6 fish again for August and September.
Okay, maybe then if Gap's worried about everything, maybe we need to start right off the get-go with 6 fish. Because that's probably a lot of work for Fish and Game to get 2 additional punch tags and go through all the vendors and all that stuff.
It
I
wasn't
know
hard at all.
from
It was easy.
okay, perfect. But it is a pain in the butt for the vendors, though.
Does anybody have anybody want to comment on the 6 fish annual limit?
Yeah, this is Glenn. I don't see a reason not to do it.
This is Phil. I support going to 6 fish annual bag limit.
This is Dave. I support going to a 6 fish limit from the very beginning.
This is Steve. I don't have a problem with it really either. Like Paul said, we need to catch our quota, our allocation. So I don't have a problem with it either.
This is Randy, and I'll change my opinion to the 6 fish.
This is Cronquist, and I'll change my opinion too.
Wow.
6 fish maximum.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Sorry, it's Rhett Weber. I'm good with 6.
Okay. Interesting. This is something that is in our own, this is not in the federal rule. So we can do this without going through federal rule. This is in our state rule. And it was on the list to check in with you all on. And is anybody opposed to a 6 fish annual limit?
I have been previously, but I'm on the fence, so I'm willing to go with the majority.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Heather?
Yeah.
The reason we had a 4 fish limit also was when the quota was smaller, and it made the most sense. And that was one reason to have it at 4. So it spread the fishery out over more citizens, et cetera, et cetera. So we got a different thing going on now. So it doesn't not make sense. Okay.
If, you know, and again, because this is in our state rule, if we come home from the annual meeting and things look very different, we don't have to make that move. And I'd be more than happy to check in with you all before we make a change, before we open the season and announce the days.
Great idea.
We'll put that placeholder there for an opportunity for a check-in after the annual meeting. Well, thank you for that. Okay, ready to move on? Since I can't see hands, I'm just going to assume that's a yes. Okay, so here, this next few slides is going to go over the allocation changes, and we've been talking a lot about it through how we set the season and the request from California to consider some allocation options. When we talked about it in September, there was some interest. I guess when we talked about it in June, actually, there was interest in, having California consider the approach that we're using, where we say, do we want 2 days or do we want 4 days per week? Rather than everything just being 7 days a week, green light, go. Consider ways that they might try to extend the season like we have. Annual bag limit is another one. And their response was that they didn't want to do any of those things. What they really want is to increase their allocation. So where we left September with was a bit of a narrowing of the allocation options. And the options are out there because it's public review. So option 1 would move 2% of the Oregon sport allocation and 1% of the Washington sport allocation to California sport. Option 2 would move 1% of the Oregon sport allocation and 0.5% of the Washington sport allocation to California. And then option 3 moves a little more than half of Oregon's sport allocation, half of a percent, and a little bit less than 0.5% of Washington's sport allocation to California sport. You know, again, as we've been talking about this, and status quo is always an option. Just these are the 3 options that were put out for public review. The council will consider the advice from management bodies and advisory bodies and the public before deciding on the final preferred option in November. I think there's maybe room for more analysis. I'm not sure if it has to be decided in November. And so when we talked about this, we also talked about it in the context of the uncertainty in the 2023 stock assessment and what's the allocation decision going to be for 2A. So we've really been fortunate to have that 1.5 million pounds, but you know, we know there's a chance we won't come home from the annual meeting with that. So when we break down these options for Washington sport, this is what those options look like. And this table is going to be in our WDFW report that we'll submit after this meeting with you all here. And it'll look a little bit different than what you'll see from the council staff report. And that's because we have taken into account the sablefish fishery, which is also allocated a portion of the Washington sport allocation when there's a certain amount that goes to Washington sport. And so this table incorporates that. Brandon, go ahead.
Okay, question. So let's say California wins something from Oregon and Washington. Is that just from the sport fisherman side of it, or is that from all of us? So the tribes end up getting pulled in on this and lose too?
No, it's just going to come from the sport allocation.
Okay.
Yeah, it just comes from sport. The difference here in Washington is our sport allocation. And you can, in the September WDFW report on this, I put some history of the Washington sport allocations to help it understand how it affects the incidental retention in the sablefish fishery. So there's a linkage there. So it will affect the sablefish incidental retention, but that's because we have it linked to our Washington sport allocation. So anyway, let me walk through these here, Brandon, before we
I got
start
one more quick question though on that. Have we talked to the tribes about this out here on the North Coast, that what's going on here, to have them jump on our side and help us?
They're aware of what's going on. Yeah.
Okay.
They haven't been on our side though.
Yeah. Yeah, they have been on the side of, yeah. Go ahead, Phil.
I'll let you go ahead and finish up. I do have a couple points I'd like to make when the time is appropriate.
Okay, sure. So I just wanted to share here that what the options look like. And this is, so option 1, what you see the sport allocations here. And then this is the difference. This is how much our Washington sport allocation would be reduced under the options. So we're talking about a reduction at most of 9,880 pounds. And then on the low end, around 3,000 pounds. And then this just shows you, when you look back at the allocations that we have had, what it looks like. So you can gauge on what that means. Actually, my next slide is to help describe what that means and the way I've been thinking about it. I don't know if anybody has a question about that, or if you want to start talking about the options before I get to the next slide. Fine either way.
So there's been a few hands up for a while, and I'm not sure if it's related to this specific topic. But we've had Randy, Dave, Phil, and then Glenn just raised his hand along with Tom.
Okay, Randy, is your hand up new or is it old?
Looks like he might have lowered it.
Yeah, sorry, it was old.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. My hand up is just for the 6 fish limit to, so we can catch our quota. We have not caught our quota since we went to a 4 fish limit. And I just, you hear from me every year, I'm just adamant about trying to raise it to 6 fish.
Okay.
And that way we can catch our quota. That's it. And thank you.
Okay. And then, Bill, did you want to say something about this?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, first of all, Paul Moraney has been a lone voice on the Gap defending Washington's allocation. He hasn't even had any help from Oregon against California's fight and suggestion that because we haven't caught our quota, we can move fish down there, no harm, no foul, to Washington. Butch and I, as your Washington council members, along with Heather, and we have been fighting this since before June, since last spring. And the decision point is coming up here in November on whether or not one or more of these options is going to, well, any of these options would be adopted by the council for the catch sharing plan and take fish away from Washington and move it to California. Steve Joner, who many of you know, is also on the Gap from the Macaw tribe, and he has said that, yeah, moving them down there, if it means catching the 2A quota, if that's what the result will be, then that's what should happen. So we have even had the tribal person in the Gap advocating this move. The backstory on that is that Lummi, in particular, has been advocating that 1.65 for Area 2A is too high, and that we have a conservation issue in 2A, and he has been advocating that the IPHC and within the tribal community that 2A's quota be lowered. And he continues to advocate, or Lummi continues to advocate that. So that's one reason Steve kind of did a about face on us and surprised me by supporting California. I have since had discussions with Steve as early as today or as late as today about trying to get him to back off that. Some of you have mentioned one of the IPHC commissioners, and it's a new commissioner. His name's Neil, and he is adamant that 2A should not have been held harmless, that we should have taken a cut along with the rest of the areas. And I suspect he and maybe some of his other 2 commissioner colleagues from Canada will be in that boat also. And my next to the last point is, some of you that have been involved with the IPHC know that there is such a thing as it's called the conference board. We used to have 2 or 3 or 4 people go to the IPHC meetings. They're a pain in the butt to go to. They're expensive, all that good stuff. Dave Grunquist did it for a number of years and sat on the conference board and represented our, kind of 2A's interests. The only person that's on the conference board now is Tim Clausen, who's from Eureka, who has been leading the fight to move fish from Washington, Oregon to California. He's the only one there out, and I don't want to in any way demean the participation that WDFW has on IPHC. And I've been continuing to be there on behalf of the council. So we've got a number of fights ahead of us here to keep this 1.65 in Area 2A. And then as a side, we have this allocation issue battle with California. I think we can prevail. I really do. I hope I'm not wrong, and keep status quo. It makes absolutely no sense to me to move fish from Washington to California. And they're using the COVID years when we had the ports of La Push and Nia Bay closed as their examples of when we haven't caught our quota, which to me is disingenuous at best. So I'll stop there, Heather, but this is we have, again, Paul's been a lone voice in GAP representing our interest here in Washington. And California has been coming on as strong as they can, trying to get some fish from Washington, Oregon, moved down to California. I'll stop. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Phil, and thank you for providing all of the background and the context and the sidebars. It's interesting, and it is going to take all of us, I think, in maintaining our 2A quota and protecting our fishery, and I won't hesitate to bring up conversation that we just had and the real struggle that we have with opening a fishery on 2 days a week or 4 days a week. That is the reason why a change to the 2A quota or any move of it to California is hard. We're not talking about maintaining a 7-day per week fishery. It's just, yeah, it's going to be challenging. So I've got,
Who did Phil say the tribal council for Macau was? Steve, what was his last name?
Joner.
He works for the Macaws. He's not a tribal member. He's not a council member. I know him really well. He's been around in the Halibut Commission realm forever. But he is on the GAP, and he has been speaking in favor of moving fish south for the sole reason, of Area 2A catching our quota.
Right.
Okay, so hey Phil, have you reached out to any of the tribal council? Macau tribal council.
Yes. This week.
Are they quiet, or I mean, what's going on though?
I think we'll get them in the right place.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
And
Brandon, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, just the other thing, we sent a letter out today that has a whole bunch of people on it. Some of the folks that are on the call today. Thanks everybody for signing on. Advocating for status quo. And I asked the Macaw tribe to sign on to that letter, but I didn't get a response quick enough to get it. But so we're working every angle we can.
Okay.
I just want to.
Is the angle gone then?
I talked to TJ. I
Sorry,
talked to
go ahead,
TJ
Dave.
today, and he's ready to sign on to it, Phil. So he's sorry for being late to it, but he would like to sign on to it. So I asked him to call you.
Okay, well, I can add his name to the signature page and resend the signature page. It's no problem. That'd be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I reached out to him today again, so.
Hey Dave, if you need some help, hit me up. I can run up there in a quick moment and go have a visit with everybody. I know quite a few of them very, very well.
All right, thanks, Brandon.
Yes,
Butch,
sir.
go ahead.
Thanks,
What-
thanks, Heather.
Sure.
It's been kind of quiet here. El Waco wants 6 fish or 8 fish annual limit, but we'll work on that later. Just kidding. So, you know, this quota thing is a very real fight, and if we prevail, and we're going to prevail this year, I know it. I don't lose lying down. They'll keep coming back, and so Phil and a lot of us signed on to his letter, but there also was a letter distributed. Brandon got it, Randy got it, a lot of the guys got it. I don't have everybody's email address. It's on Facebook telling you how to comment. And for example, in June, California had over 100 letters supporting the moving of the quota. And I think if you haven't sent one to the council, it's very simple. There's a link that takes you right there. And you just have to put it, you don't have to, it's not world and peace testimony. It could be as simple as if you agree with this, but telling you how to, but it'd be as simple, we do not support moving Washington halibut quota to California. And get those in ASAP. There's been a good response because of, Paul Wassler got it on Facebook, or however you say his last name. If you would like to get that, and you can send me an email at, I'll put it in the chat, and I can get you that letter with the link, so you can also add your testimony. But this is real, and I didn't get into the 4 days or 3 days or whatever Nia Bay wants to do. That's not my area. But I think that with the prospect of losing quota, all of us, I think we're in the odd position. A couple years ago, we were trying to get 2 and 3 in 5 days, and now we're trying to catch it all. And that's a weird thinking than 10 years ago. But it's a new thing. And if we stay up there, over the 1.3 or 1.4 million, then we're going to have to think that way. So anyway, I'll put my email in the chat box. You can send me an email. I'd be glad to get you the letter that I sent out to a lot of people, so you too can write a testimony letter to the council. Very simple. So thank you, Heather, and thank you for this meeting.
Yeah, you're welcome. Phil, your hand is up. I'm not sure if that's from before. If you'd like to say some more, feel free.
No, I'm done. I'll put it down. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I've just got a couple more slides here, and just wanted to share a little bit of what we saw when we looked at those changes to the Washington allocation. The just about 10,000 pounds to 3,000 pounds. What it might look like is something minor, a minor change to our allocation, but it's really not. And so for us to put an apples to apples type of comparison together so that you can understand what that looks like, if in 2015, when the 2A quota was 970,000 pounds, the North Coast and South Coast subareas were only open 3 and 4 days respectively. In between 2016 and 2018, when the FCEY was 1.1 to 1.3 million pounds, the season length averaged 9 days per subarea. So had the Washington coastal season been structured to be open starting May 1, with no staggering of our open days or midweek closures, the season would have closed, this is for on May 5th, 7th, and 8th for the North Coast, South Coast, and Columbia River. So even with the 2A FCEY of 1.5 million pounds in 2023, had all the sport areas opened on May 1st with no staggering days, et cetera, and using the May to June average catch, which is about 7,000 pounds per day, the Washington recreational season would have only been open for 37 days. So that gives a look at what those allocations mean in apples to apples compared to California. And so I just did a little bit of a look at that today. So looking at angler trips, and through July of 2023, we've had 9,625 angler trips targeting halibut only. And so at 37 days, that's 260 angler trips per day, which equates to a potential revenue loss of about $97,000 for one day lost. And I just used a $375 halibut trip cost to make that calculation. So I acknowledge it's a little bit back of the envelope. I'm not an economist, but to put that into perspective, it is a big deal. It's 260 angler trips for one day lost. So it isn't insignificant. It does matter. And then not only does the allocation change affect the Washington sport fishery, but it will also affect the incidental allowance in the sablefish fishery. And so had any of the options been in place in 2015 at that 970,000 quota level, there would have been no halibut retention in the sablefish fishery. And that would have been a loss of $62,000 in revenue. And then if you look at that and what Lorna did for our report that you'll see in the briefing book, is that looking at a range of hypothetical but really plausible catch quotas, the revenue losses for the sablefish fishery range from $15,000 to $63,000. So it is a big deal. It might, if you just look at that poundage, somebody could say, oh gee, that's not very much, but it does have an impact, and it does impact anglers at 260 anglers per day. So just wanted to share that with you too as you start thinking about the November council meeting. So now here it's getting late, but I do want to run through the Bottomfish management process that we're about ready to get started through the council. And I'm just we're not gonna get into any details here, but mostly let you know what the process looks like and where there's opportunity to provide public comment, where we'll have public meetings like this that won't be focused on halibut, but they'll be focused on bottomfish as we work through this process. So this slide here shows you the timeline starting in November 2023 at the council meeting that's coming up. The council will adopt our final overfishing limits and annual catch limits for our stocks and stock complexes. So that sets the level that we'll be managing to in 2025 and 2026. So after November, we'll hold a meeting probably in January and February. At that point, we'll know, what stocks we're going to be honing in on, where we might need to make some changes. So we'll start with the public meeting there in January or February of 2024, and that will be in advance of the March council meeting. March council meeting, the council really just gets an update on this process. A lot of our analysts like Whitney, who was on the call, and Lorna, and folks in Oregon and California who are doing all of this analysis, they'll be doing that over the winter. They'll flag for the council if there's anything to be concerned about in March or something we missed or something like that. There's no decisions in March. But then after that meeting, we'll follow up with another WDFW meeting and we'll start looking at our alternatives, our options, and working through the analysis, what Lorna and I are uncovering when we look at the data. And that will be in preparation for April 2024, where the council will adopt final annual catch limits and management measures. When I say management measures, I just mean bag limits, area closures. It could be season dates, that kind of thing. And then we'll do another meeting in May leading up to where the June meeting where the council will adopt final management measures. And when they do that in June 2024, it sets the process in place to have rules in place by January 1, 2025. So that's what the process looks like. Down here is where I mean, these are preliminary. We'll meet as much as we need to, but this is where I see the real points of contact with stakeholders on Bottomfish. And then this slide here, I just wanted to go through with you where we are and kind of what we're seeing as we look ahead to 2025 and 2026. So I'm just going to point out a couple things here. So black rockfish had a new assessment. The harvest limits, what we're looking at for 2025 and 2026 this is from the stock assessment, so it's not final, this is all preliminary, but when we look at the stock assessment, we're looking at a Washington harvest limit of right around 245 metric tons in 2025 and 241 in 2026. The catch, just to put that into context of where we are in 2023, our catch through August is, our harvest limit in 2023 is 271 metric tons. So that's about a 30 metric ton difference. Our catch here, through August is 163 metric tons. Canary rockfish is another one. Our catch is 21 metric tons through August. Our current harvest level is 41 metric tons, but the stock assessment, again, this is just a really preliminary number. It's not even in the stock assessment because it's a coast-wide stock, but Lorna and I did some calculations to try to come up with what it looks like we might be looking at, maybe 17 metric tons. That's less than what we've caught already through August this year. Yellow eye, which used to dominate our conversations, our catches under 4 metric tons. We're looking at, 8.6 and 8.8 metric tons in 25, 26. Vermilion rockfish, which is just really challenging for us. The harvest guideline is 0.74. I'm sorry, the harvest guideline is 0.7. Our catch through August is 0.74. And our projected catch here through the end of the season is 0.83. So our projected catch for vermilion right now is over our harvest guideline. What Lorna and I realized, and we talked to some of you, we talked to our port samplers too, especially up at Nebe, there was some confusion about our new rule in 2023 where there's no retention May, June, and July. And I think May there were people who didn't know that they couldn't retain vermilion. So we had some retention in the month of May. We think we can really improve with some outreach. But looking at very similar harvest levels in 2025 and 2026 of less than a metric ton for vermilion rockfish. So that'll be something we'll be talking about as we look ahead. When you look at copper and quillback, those are other places where we have seen our catch kind of close to our harvest guidelines. We're even when we do a projection to the end of the year, we're staying under those. Okay, so canary rockfish, vermilion rockfish, or kind of what is rising to a level that Lauren and I are pretty sure we'll be talking about with you all at these meetings coming up. So if we, what are the tools we have? What do I mean by managed measures? If we need to reduce catch, what do we have? We have bag limits, we have depth restrictions, and we have area closures. So those are the kinds of things that we'll be talking about during these meetings over the winter and next spring. Go ahead, Brandon.
Okay, does that include us in Marine Area 5, or is that just the ocean?
Yeah, this is just the ocean. So these changes are really, this is all coastal. That's a really good point. I'm sorry I didn't make that. This is all just coastal marine areas 1 through 4.
Okay. Is there any way or anybody to talk to like change boundary lines or bag limits in 5?
Yeah, those are Puget Sound managers, and I can get you the person you need to talk to.
Okay, perfect. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Go ahead, Steve.
So is the black rockfish assessment done, or is it still in progress? I think you kind of said it's still going on.
We did adopt the stock assessments in September.
Okay, so that's the information you're using.
Yeah.
To base 25 and 26
right
seasons. Okay, so it's done. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, just I'm going to briefly touch on the copper rockfish thing because I noticed that's still real close. I'm going to reach out, and I did so already, to some people about properly identifying the number of browns we have that probably get identified as coppers is quite high. So I think just a little grassroots, we could probably bring our copper rockfish number down. And I hate to see time area closures applied to try to cut down our canary rockfish take. Maybe if I just encourage guys to target yellowtails instead of canaries during the deep water season would probably bring those numbers down drastically. So, I mean, that's going to be a disappointment for some of my people, but they'll get it. So I'll just try to push that.
Okay. Okay. Were you the misidentification, were you reaching out to Erica in the ocean sampling program folks?
No, I haven't, but I have reached out on the Westport Sport Fishing page. I can just I put up a couple pictures showing the easiest way to tell them apart and make sure they identify that they caught those and not coppers, if that's the case.
Okay. Thanks for that. I'll flag it for Erica too.
Well,
okay, great.
Okay.
Just real quick on canary. I mean, that's using the existing allocation of the ACL between year types. So there may be some relief there depending on how we, what we do in terms of allocating the resource.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely at play for sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's the last slide, everyone. all that's on here is just where you can find more information, and for the IPHC, our regulations for halibut and bottomfish, and where you can find the information for the council too. But of course, Lorna and I are always a resource, and just know that Lorna, it's just me through October. So if you need anything, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to help. What my next step is here is to take the input that I got from you all on the season dates and put that into a WDFW report. And then that'll get submitted to the briefing book. So you'll see it on the webpage, but we'll get it out to everyone too via email once we get it submitted to the council. Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
What do you mean you're here just through October? Did I not hear something correct?
What I meant is Lorna's on vacation through October, so it's just
Lorna.
me.
Oh, okay, my
She's
bad.
coming
You
back.
scared me. I'm like, I thought you meant you're sailing off
Oh.
into the sunset. We need you.
No, I didn't. I
Okay.
didn't win the lottery.
Okay. Okay, good.
Not yet. Yeah, no, I'm just saying that Lorna isn't around, so feel free to reach out to me. I'll be here for a while. Well, I sure appreciate everyone. Oh, I'm sorry.
This was really a great meeting that you put on, Heather, and I thought we had a great conversation amongst everybody. Thanks.
Me too.
Yes, you are a rock star.
Me too. Thanks, everyone. You are all as well. I do appreciate each and every one of you, and thanks for spending your evening doing this. So we'll be in touch, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks.
Everyone, thanks, Heather.
Bye.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.